Because it has that ramp effect. But I think in the current state of things, it does seem like it kind of fits in very well to what it's up against. Would love to investigate that more, but as we're talking about it, two Forcecraft lists here now. Whael is going to open up with one of them, while Vetu opens up with the Runecraft deck, the legendary Dimensional Shift list. Please, deck codes out there because it can beat aggro blood.
Clearly, right. D-Shift versus like Roach combo. I can't even say it. It's so like, you know, we haven't seen it in forever. D-Shift versus Roach combo. Mofu, how does this work out? Let me know.
Well, back from the old days, when this was actually a common thing on ladder, I'm pretty sure there was a time when Roach actually just farmed this matchup. But both lists have changed a lot recently, and the way we've been seeing Vetu play, his use of the bite-sized chimeras and otherwise, he's not afraid of just playing for tempo. He doesn't hold his pieces the way D-Shift always does, and that might just be enough to sometimes force Whael to use parts of his combo. So really, I expect Roach to have an advantage, but I wouldn't say that I'm confident that it absolutely will.
I definitely agree with everything said there, and I also agree with the game plan of kind of forcing out, you know, combo pieces. I think Dimensional Shift, if it can bait out Roaches, if it can play that aggressive way, has a much better chance of winning. So, since historically, usually Roach is a bit like about a turn faster than D-Shift. I don't know. Owl kind of shakes things up a bit. Turn 6 is possible, so you know it's kind of weird.
Which I had no idea of hitherto.
See a Fate's Hand. We also see Vetu still hasn't drawn Dimensional Shift, so unfortunate for him. He's 11 cards deep, and he doesn't even have the card that he needs, and has already expended a Wind Blast even on that Lilac, I think is her name? Yeah, Lilac.
That interests me a lot because it implies to me that Vetu actually cares a bit more about forward. Lilac doesn't put that much pressure face. He played to protect his clay golem there.
Very interesting play. 2 0-cost fairies in the hand of Whael now that Elven Princess Mage has evolved, and Vetu does find Dimensional Shift, so he has that as an option now. He can start boosting that with his Sorcery Cache, or he can go for the Golem Assault play. Either one would be fine.
Seems like a pretty clean trade to make, and this is also boosting his Chimera even lower if he decides at any point that he wants to go for tempo.
And Tiny Chimera, you know, I like that you said bite-sized Chimera. It reminds me of Candy, so close to Halloween. Bite-sized like Chimera is actually very useful in these matchups. You know, like if your opponent ever tries to play anything with 4 defense, or anything really that has a threshold of even 10, like Chimera can actually get rid of Atomy. He can kill an evolved Atomy on his own, so very, very useful card.
I think we've actually seen a matchup before where something like that almost came to be, but Chimera now almost free, continuing to find ways to cycle. I suppose he goes for his Golem Assault here just to get one more spell boost in.
More than likely, yes. I can't imagine. He might save it, actually, to enhance against Roach.
That's really interesting, because I partially see that, and I partially agree with it. I think a card that existed before Golem Assault in Ancient Alchemist, there's like 10 of them. It was another card that also generated a mass number of copies of Guardian Golems at once, and it used to be by itself a win condition versus Roach by just putting up these huge problem wards that have all high defense.
I think Ancient Alchemist maybe is the name. It's a 5-play.24 that consumes an Earthright to give you 3 Conjure Golems. That's the card you're thinking of?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the name. I may be wrong.
Yeah, I'm like 99% sure. But now that D-Shift has access to that effect without needing to play the Earthright, that was optional. I see some people running Commence Experiment and whatnot, but being given that way to get out of this matchup and having it synergize also with with Vetu's deck, in that it continues to boost up the D-Shifts and otherwise, I think could be a huge edge in this matchup.
I agree. Whael evolving a Roach here Gonna put Vetu down to 15. If a ward's not established, I do think he has lethal with Fairy Fairy, Roach, Nature's Roach, Roach Evolve.
Mm-hmm. The classic.
The classic.
Which has been possible since the most ancient times of Shadowverse. It's kind of like the input for an ultimate, really, in a fighting game. Except you can't really mess it up.
Except you can't really mess it up.
I guess this all then comes down to Vetu's perception of whether or not that evolved hit means that Whael is threatening lethal immediately. If so, he has an option that creates a ward, which does stop it, kind of. Evolving the ward could get it around the Airbound Barrage.
Right, the Airbound Barrage could be used to get around that Golem Assault, which would be highly unfortunate. But he didn't cast Golem Assault last turn, right? So he doesn't actually have that ward unless he casts this Conjure Golem first. That's what he's going to go for. But it's actually very, very awkward here because he has to evolve something to kill this Roach. But if he puts the Guardian at 2... Oh, never mind, he has the Chimera. There we go. Useful. But does he evolve this?
He
evolved the Chimera!
Now, this I both
Now, I'm not
adore.
a math major, but I think he can do it now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not a double Airbound Barrage for sure.
Mm-hmm. Very, very. Well, I suppose he has to expend an Airbound Barrage first, doesn't he? I didn't consider that. I just saw it as 3 damage.
Fairy, Airbound Barrage, Roach, Nature's Roach Evolve. I think
Sounds like an absurd amount of
6
damage.
plus 8 shorthand math. I don't think he can quite do it, actually. Roach math is always so weird. If he plays 4 before the first, he can do 5 plus 7 plus 2.
I think what you just said was 5, 7, 8, actually.
Was it? Is that... Did I get it?
Because the Airbound Barrage is again here, or could fairy. Roach, bounce, Roach. That's 5, 7, 8. That is more
right,
than...
yes. Right, and then Roach, and then evolves the first one or the second one, doesn't matter. Right, that is...
Yeah, also goes to
that is 6
evolve.
plus 7 plus 2, yeah.
So would you consider... Would you call it non-linear if there were a lot of ways to do it, but they all did the same thing?
I think I honestly confused myself with the multiple ways he could have found it. I was looking at... Because like I said, I didn't think I had it, because I was 90% sure he had it, but then confused myself. But yeah, that was some Roach math, some high-tier Roach math right there.
That was some nice abacus
Airbound Barrage
sliding.
is a big deal right there too. Like, what do you think about that? Airbound Barrage. What do you think of that card? It's a new bronze from Starforged Legends. It is a 1 play point forest card. Bounces a follower or amulet to do 3 damage to an enemy follower. Obviously, you know, was paramount in that lethal right there. What do you think of that card?
If you ask me, I think it's the single most important card ever printed for Forestcraft. I think it...
Outside of
both
Roach?
gives-
Roach itself?
Well, let's take Roach for granted. It was there to begin with. We never like waited on Roach, or like suddenly knew Forestcraft existed and then got Roach.
Right.
kind of
Okay.
thing.
I see what you're saying. So printed after the basic set. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, like in the common era, like post Jesus death kind of thing.
Yeah. Post. Yeah. After
Like in that
standard
situation.
BS.
In that situation, even had Vetu evolved the 3/3 into a 5/5, those 2 Airbound Barrages, very barrage.
Right. Yeah. He actually just had 2 of them anyway.
Smacks
Right.
it out.
Yep. I don't even know what is it's Archer. What does he say in English? Do you know? He actually doesn't say anything. There's no English for him, is there?
There's only Japanese voices, but I've heard this one enough times and screamed at it enough times to know that he says Karadubulg, which is the name of his sword,
Yeah.
Kaladbolg.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. That's naming the
Yeah, he
name
didn't know,
of your sword is clearly what Airbound Barrage
he
is
shoots
doing.
a sword out of the bow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, mid-range Shadow now versus Dimensional Shift Rune. I know exactly how this probably goes. How do you think this goes, Mofu?
I think, with a little bit less certainty, that mid-range Shadow is very difficult to clear and ends up finding lethal just before D-Shift does, but you're the one who plays D-Shift. I could be wrong.
Ooh, I don't know. That's a pretty. I mean, it's a good way of wording it. You know, it could happen, especially with Vetu having a hand that isn't really very Very reactive. He's got double Sword Cash, double Fire Embrace. Not great at handling this. At the moment, I actually agree. I actually agree with you. I think he can eke this out. Or rather, eekter this out, if you will.
I like that. Would you say that D-Shift is usually favored here?
Against most mid-range strategies, yes, D-Shift is usually favored. Because they can usually, you know, just keep bouncing the advances of a mid-range deck, because they're not fast enough, usually. But this hand is pretty bad, pretty unfortunate.
Right. I see a lot of important cards that he'd like to draw eventually, but I think the mini bite-sized child baby chimera so far has proven the most useful of all the cards in his list when it comes to dealing with aggression. And I think he has the time to find it, but as we get through these next 3 turns and Whael actually manages this Death's Breath, if he wishes to play it on curve, then into Yaktar, I think that is just too much damage for Vetu to be able to deal with a hand like that.
Right, his hand is not shaping up to answer this very well. Death's Breath obviously not going to trigger into the point where it gets the ward, but you don't really care at that point. You're kind of just making zombies at that point. A pretty good draw, however, in Merlin. He could get rid of the Darkblade Fiend, but it's going to leave 4 on the board, and I don't think he wants to go for that.
Now, would he end up expending a Fiery Embrace this turn? I think there's some logic in using Merlin alongside Angelic Snipe just to try to find something else to work with. It seems awkward no matter how you cut it.
This seems like a very interesting situation for Dimensional Shift. He's not able to boost D-Shift there. He actually boosted the Fiery Embrace down to 1. So he can go Angelic Snipe, Fiery Embrace, and then also Golem Assault here to kind of like sort of get back a little bit. So next turn he can go Merlin, Golem Assault, and that other Fiery Embrace. But I think Death's Breath might just be too much for him to handle.
Right. Even without the additional defense afforded, even without the ability to evolve face here, Whael just has such a stable setup of aggression.
This board, I think, is a bit too much. Quite too much. He's not quite at 8, so even if Merlin were to find a Wind Blast, he can't use that next to the Conjure Golem to help wipe this board a bit. And it finds a second Dimensional Shift anyway. That's not quite good enough at all. He could have used his 7 play point Dimension Shift this turn, but it would have been next to nothing, and it kind of would have just ramped him for 1 play point. Not really done anything, so...
It'd be a 7-cost Dragon Oracle, if I've ever seen one.
A 7-cost Dragon Oracle, yep. It would literally draw an extra card. It would cycle itself, you're right.
I think there is some promise in his following turn, if I'm seeing this all correctly. Not
if he gets a following turn, that is. I mean, he does get hit. It looks like he will. You know, Eekter comes down, but he's not that bad.
No way for a Whael, and I've noticed this is a quality of a natural quality of Shadow, is that although it can do immense amounts of damage at once, it's not a very OTK class when we're not talking about it in context of Atomy.
Right. I was gonna say, have you heard of my friend Deathblade Tyrant?
I've heard his mixtape. I follow him.
You've heard his mixtape. It is pretty fire. So he could go for a zombie party to flood the board, or a Thane even. Thane wouldn't allow him to push as much damage as zombie party would, since he could go for 6 face if he wanted to with a zombie party, but you know, Eekter also pushes similar damage.
I like all of his options here. I think really honestly could go for any one of these 3, and all of them would have a very similar effect. Push a similar amount of damage, and all of them lead to convincing setups.
All of them lead to Vetu being pretty dead. It's gonna have to go. It's a great glow draw, but he's gonna probably have to play Dimensional Shift to get the board back in any sense here. Throwing away your win condition and shift that way is kind of bad. Feels bad to draw Magic Owl after it's useless.
Well, Magic Owl's part of the win con now. He's gonna try his best, I think, to be a part of contributing damage to a D-Shift if he does throw one down, and he has to. Oh, he's getting there.
Second Owl, okay. Unfortunately, he can't he can't quite get the second shift down to 0 or 10 rather, not 0 or
He
9.
throws
even.
down this D shift, and then he has a Fate's hand that falls a little bit, so he can throw that
Right.
out. The D shift becomes 9.
He is able to play these double owls as well, so he can get rid of this. He's going for Merlin instead. That actually does let him boost that shift to 9. I stand corrected. So he's going to boost the shift to 9. He's going to shift again, doing 7 total twice, but that's still 4 off.
I think he is starting to claw his way back into the game here, though. I think
He
that
can clear the board for sure. I think he's looking for a lethal even. If he finds Giant Chimera and is able to get it to 4 at least. This Destroyer is so close to being playable, but it's just not quite there.
So we can expect to see him begin to shift his attention towards clearing here. And I don't know how Whael finds that remainder of damage if he doesn't have a board to build it upon. The fastest thing I see in his hand is a Thane. He might have to use this reactor to clear, actually.
He might. Wind Blast. He can use the Wind Blasts here to kind of save the fact that Merlin's on the board. However, there's a Wind Blast. There's an Evolve available on Whale's side of the board, and Eekter kind of also just does that by summoning Rush followers. Sword Cash on Dimensional Shift, I'd imagine. Yes, it was. And he can even Conjure Goal on this turn, so he can put that D shift at 10. It is castable next turn if he does that, next to a Flame Destroyer. So this is looking pretty good actually for Vetu. He could actually just even summon all of this and just go full out with Chimera Flame Destroyer this turn. I like this a lot.
How
if he does that, yes.
Whale
I love
come
this.
back from this?
I love this. I mean, he's just using Dimensional Shift to gain back the board. He's using it for tempo, and that's an incredible play. That flips the onus back onto Whale to all of a sudden have to answer this board, and it's massive. I don't know how he does. I don't think he even can.
He can't do it. The only real significant amount of impact takes up his entire turn. Just 2 zombies out of Eekter. Clear 2 things, clear the Flame Destroyer, but he got shot down to 4 during that. Vetu just took that.
He just stole that game. He said, I will yoink this away with Dimensional Shift. Amazing D-Shift play. Very proud of Vetu. He found it. He did it.
It's ballet, really. He very narrowly skidded the line of what he could do with D-Shifts. And in doing so, used them in a way that really amazes me.
I honestly do not see a way that Whale comes back from this. Even Eekter is not castable next to Zombie Party. Eekter is just not the monster he used to be. He can't ram himself into the entire board and win, so.
Would old Eekter have done it? That would have been a full board of zombies, I'm pretty sure. But I think he actually would have still lost, even with old Eekter. Because that D-Shift
Old Eekter would have been a
still...
full part. It would have been a full army of zombies, yes, but it couldn't evolve over. Actually, no. Old Eekter would have cleared the board.
With the Evo point, you may be right.
Yeah, because Old Eekter could evolve over the Destroyer, and then you'd ram every 4-2 into everything else. So Old Eekter would have cleared that.
Fine.
Wow. What a difference a change in a card can make. Whale not able to clear the board, and now we're going to see Forest versus Shadow. Ooh. And not just any forest. We're just going to see Vetu's control forests.
Now that we have seen mid-range shadow lists like this face off against grindy control lists before, but not this kind. Not a grindy neutral control forest.
It's definitely a very interesting, a very unique list. It'll be interesting to see what happens in this matchup. If you had to guess, if you had to toss your coin into the well here, who would you guess would win?
I think that mid shadow just simply has the consistency it takes to deal with the otherwise sort of slow value based mid game that this control forest list seems to have. But the existence of Beauty and the Beast always forces me to make a caveat to that. If it works out for Vetu, it works out, and it could be devastating.
That is true, and to be fair, I mean, you know, Whale, he's not playing Atomy, but he does play Deathway Tyrant, so he does have access to a lot of damage at once with one follower, so. But that was an absolutely devastating Elf Twin Assault. That was pretty bad.
Bit of an awkward way or path forward for him now. Having to throw down Demon Eater is the equivalent of Goblin never feels good.
Yeah, it's a Goblin. It's a 2 play point Goblin. You paid double for the Goblin, and there's not even a timeshare to come along with it. That feels bad for sure.
Mm-hmm. Was I was getting some value back on his Goblin.
Getting value back on his literal Goblin.
Getting a bit of a refund.
Getting a bit of a refund went to the government. Sylvan Justice can help Vetu clear, though. Also, he can play it next to a Unica, so... I honestly do think Vetu's got the answers for a while. He can definitely smell what Whael is cooking, and he can answer it.
I think that Whael is actually in a horrendous position here. I think even just not have... Ooh.
Wow! Vetu even popping an Elf Twin Assault. Just going to completely get rid of any plays that involve Demon Eater or Soul Conversion, and Whael is going to have to pay double for this Goblin again, and probably Soul Convert it, which is probably the worst feeling ever.
Gets
Oh
another
my
refresh for his Goblin, and one of the most valuable cards in the deck, one of the biggest swings, has to use it to mitigate damage from this very slow-running control deck.
This is just highly unfortunate for Whael. He needs some incredible top decks. I mean, Death's Breath's a good start. It's going to mitigate a lot of damage. Wards are effective at that. He would have to pop and evolve, though. Dark Blade Fiend's also not a bad play here. It would eat 2 shadows, but it would gain back 1 when it dies. It could also wipe the board, as opposed to Death's Breath not wiping the board, so...
Unfortunately, I see in Vetu's hand that Sahak Wheel poses such a... Well, no, never mind. I thought he went
next
first for a
turn.
second.
Next turn,
Right.
yeah, it does.
That actually means that Vetu's next turn is dependent on whatever he draws. So that Sahak Wheel Israfil could get him out of a tight spot soon, but next turn, going to be kind of difficult to find something, and it's just short of the amount of damage it needs to clear this without using an evolve point.
Which is definitely unfortunate. He's not playing value cards like May. Another Sahak Wheel. That's not good. And a Fairy Evolved to kill a 5/1 Dark Blade Fiend. Ugh, has to hurt.
Though, I think there is a perfect amount of sense to this, and that he knows he has 3 Sahak Wheels, meaning he gets to get a free hit from this Israfil 3 turns in a row. I think that is so much mitigation of pressure that he doesn't have to worry too much about using an evolution point like that.
It is for a while, but I mean, when you think about it, Israfil only wipes 1 of these because she does 2 on the AoE. Ictor can come and swing in for a solid 8 damage, so it's not the worst thing in the world, really, for Whael.
I think a very important part of this is the fact that since these wards aren't being cleared if he plays the Ictor, then there's not going to be a guaranteed way to actually hit the Ictor's body.
Oh no, the Thane is actually playing directly into what Vetu wanted, because now he can just do that again, and once the bodies are gone, he can evolve one of the Sahak Wheels to take out the Thane.
Which makes me wonder. There's no way Whael knows that that's about to happen. I would never... Well, perhaps he does. He knows the list. He's seen it happen, actually.
Well, he did just jam that Thane pretty hard, so I don't think he thinks a second Sahak Wheel is possible.
Right, I was contemplating if a second Sahak Wheel comes out and Whael expects it, then maybe the trades make a lot of sense there, but this board is just all buttered up. At the very least, it makes it a very awkward trade for the Sahak Wheel if he wants to remove the Thane itself.
It does. It also gets rid of his last evolve, so he can't just play Israfil on 9 if he opts for that, so he actually might skip the turn, and he does. He even skips the turn. He offers the damage and says, okay, go for it. I'm just going to play Israfil for a 3rd time next turn. Try it.
And that Israfil will line up so cleanly, considering that this surviving Sahak Wheel can butter up that Ictor into that range of a 2 damage sweep.
Right,
So
he would
Ictor
have to
does
do
more.
the heads-up play and throw in one of the zombies if he goes for that. Or, you know, he has the Villainous or a 2-drops, you know, he could throw it in with Brush as well. But mostly, whatever he does, he kind of just gets hit by this Israfil a bit too hard.
Just drain some of the natural potency of Shadow to just generate these small tokens.
It's definitely interesting. We'll see what ends up happening. There's also not there's a Soul Squasher in the hand of Whael, so he can actually answer the Evolved Isserfill. It's not that big of a deal. And realistically, Vetu kind of just wants a Bahamut like ASAP, I think.
Right. I think the question running through Whale's head here is, with Vetu being so high in defense, perhaps trying to find some way to charge up his Tyrant is the way out. But with so many outlets that are draining his shadows from his hand, I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think he's decided against it here.
I imagine that Whael is aware. Yes, he is aware of the Isserfill play. He knows that he needs to go for it. So interesting that he plays Belinus into it, knowing that Soul Squasher can answer the Isserfill anyway. This actually makes the third Sock Wheel perfect for this, realistically.
This looks like a variation of Hector into Hector into Hector, and that Whale's attempts at value or aggression otherwise have all just been cleanly swept up.
To be fair, three Isserfills in a row that all have Rush is it's pretty good, turns out.
Right. Even past the Death's Breath that was able to partially survive one, making it look kind of good. Well, Whael has now exhausted his, or many of his shadows. I don't see this Tyrant coming online anytime soon. He needs to find a way to deal another 4 damage then if he assumes this Tyrant is just coming out by itself.
He could just completely play his entire hand, although that does, again, just feed directly into the Isserfill, which can finally be played on its own, since he's out of Sock Wheels.
In fact, making that trade made it just a little bit easier to do all this. Also a Grimnir
Definitely
just in
did. He
case
can throw in the Isserfill, or the Sock Wheel rather, and then get the Clash before the Bane would take effect. Soul Squasher would be the answer since he'd have 5 shadows, but after that, Whael is out of resources. What does Whael do at that point?
He draws his second Tyrant, and it just magically drains up the shadows from somewhere. Because he doesn't have any other resources, or I think he's already used up his Demon Eaters a lot actually early in the game to try to cycle for these cards that all just proved to not be
he did. He did get absolutely destroyed by his draw order in the beginning of the game. I suppose he could gather the shadows needed via Spirit Bomb style.
This is the end.
I think it's
He might just actually bane down his own Isserfill here. Wow, he did. He baned his own Isserfill. Realizing he can set up a Hector lethal if he top decked another neutral card. I like this a lot. This is cool, dude.
Even just one card in Whale's hand.
And actually, never mind. The game is just over because Whael unfortunately can't kill a 4/2 follower.
There it is. What an interesting end for Vetu there, kind of making a big call out. I mean, in my mind, there might have, I would have tried to play it safe there. I wouldn't have gone for the face damage at all. What do you guys think would have been the line of play you would have taken?